Hello team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and my esteemed guest for the second time on the channel. And I've also had a chat with him on Silicon Curtain with Mesa Gifford as well, and Jonathan Fink obviously there, and that was really, really fantastic. Shaun Pinner, and Shaun Pinner will no doubt introduce himself. For many of you, he will need no introduction. He's been involved in the war. He was captured by the Russians, was tortured, imprisoned and tortured, then was released. We'll hear some of this. You can go and watch my previous interview with him to get that whole kind of picture and experience. But I'm sure for those who don't know him, he will just introduce himself and talk a little bit about that. Anyway, that's enough preamble. Shaun, thanks so much for coming on, mate.
No, it's great to be here. Again, it's getting to be a regular thing now.
Yeah.
So much to talk about as well.
Do you know what I sometimes wonder? I've been doing this for several years now I've not had a day off, literally since I started doing this, like not weekends, not holiday, not Christmas Day, literally haven't had a day off for over 2 years. And I think sometimes surely I've run out of things to say, and surely like there isn't going to be more to talk about on a daily basis. And then lo and behold, it's I don't want to call it the gift that keeps on giving, because I'd rather it didn't. But
yeah, I'd give it all up to go back to what it was like before.
Yeah,
for sure. No.
Yeah, but anyway, introduce yourself to people who don't know you, what you went through, and where you're at now.
I'm a former British soldier, 9 years in the Royal Anglian Regiment. I came to Ukraine in 2018, married a Ukrainian. It's quite important to say that I paid my taxes here, had a house on the left bank in Mariupol, lived there for a number of years. I was later joined the Marines. I was an instructor here for 2 years before I joined the Marines in 2020, where I was in the 1st Battalion, quite a prestigious battalion in the Marines, where I became an airborne assault units, passed all aspects of parachuting and jumping as a Ukrainian soldier, did 9 jumps, 4 combat jumps, 1 jump at night, passed their beret test. So I was an intricate part of the military here long before the full-scale invasion. And I only joined the Marines to get my residency, which by that time I was married, had my family here. Like I said, paid my taxes here, bought a house. And then I was on my 4th deployment when the full-scale invasion kicked off in February of 2022. So
you could not be accused of being a Johnny-come-lately mercenary.
No, I was married. I learned Russian first as well, which really blows people's minds, because most people I spoke to and where I lived spoke Russian, and I speak a form of Suzyk, which is a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian. So my wife is in fact from Crimea as well. I know her first language is Russian. She speaks Russian, Ukrainian, and English. So I was, one of those Russian speakers from East Ukraine that Putin was trying to liberate. So when I was a Cockney Russian speaker from east of Ukraine, so I was really became about defending my family, and it was my 4th deployment on the front lines. I was a section commander by then, so I wasn't sort of somebody that had come in as a war tourist. I was here part of a democratically elected government, part of the military, signed a contract for 3 years, and the Russians knew it when they captured me around April in Mariupol.
Yeah, and obviously we talked about this previously, but briefly, how long were you in prison for? What was your experience in terms of, I guess as concisely as possible, and obviously I would assume there was some torture involved in there. And what was your experience about concerning being released?
Yeah, we talked about that last time. I was captured around the 13th of April after 7 weeks fighting in one of the biggest battles since World War II, really. Lost 60% of our platoon. My house on the left bank completely destroyed, and also, our community and everything else we'd built up on over many years just completely gone. With a lot of people moving back in towards Dnipro and Kiev. So when I was captured about 2 hours outside Mariupol, when Zelensky finally gave the nod to either negotiate surrenders or try and get back to friendly lines. Being a Brit, I was never going to surrender, so I tried to get out. Got captured about 2 hours outside Mariupol after an ambush, and then I was in 7 months in a Russian prison where I was electrocuted initially, stabbed in the leg, got a 3-inch knife wound straight away as soon as I was captured.
And why was that?
Pardon?
Why was that? Why were you stabbed in the leg? I mean, I know the answer, but for the audience,
running anywhere. I won't get too into details of it because it's it really. I was captured by the Donetsk People's Republic, which are quite a shim-sham mishmash militia. When they handed me straight over to Russians who had some training in interrogation and resistance, they didn't want me running anywhere, so they stabbed me in the leg. And then I was taken to Donetsk, where I was starved for 60 days, just eating bread every now and again, pulled out for propaganda, and then put on a death penalty, given the death penalty after a sham trial in around June, where they just put us on public exhibition, trial by public opinion, long before the trial had even come around. We weren't given, defence laws as such. We were allocated one. Mine was originally a woman, then became a man, became a woman. And then they never came to visit us in prison, take our side of the story statements. And we were trialed as Nazi mercenary terrorists. It was really important. I never set foot out of the country I had legal status in. And they knew that. They knew that we had contracts and we were military. They knew I was married to a Ukrainian and Mariupol was my home. Yet they still wanted to portray us as Nazis. I'm not Nazi. I'm not a mercenary. I'm certainly not a terrorist. I never set foot out of Ukraine. So, it was a big propaganda stunt to get Viktor Medvedchuk, who would have been the guy to replace Zelensky if they'd have been successful. I was exchanged with him, for him. We got a good exchange, about 150 Ukrainians, 10 foreigners for about 55 Russians and Viktor Medvedchuk. So I was glad to be exchanged. But we weren't given prisoner of war status. We didn't get any humanitarian aid help. And obviously, the rest is history. You can pretty much find it all online.
His book, and I advise everyone get the audio book because I love listening to people's words when they read it themselves. So Shaun actually reads this himself, and so you get a sense of, especially if you know Shaun, like we've seen obviously Shaun on these podcasts or whatever and elsewhere, and you can picture the person reading this, who he is, and it gives you that whole, I think, package. And it was interesting listening to that part where you were swapped for Medvedchuk with people like Aidan Naslin, and it was like, oh, I recognise that guy as you're on the airplane leaving. I believe it was.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it for people, but yeah, it's There's a lot of what I talk. I've just been to Lithuania actually talking about the impact of Russia has in places, the border countries, but you don't need to tell them. They understand that already in Lithuania. So before I did my presentation, I talked to him and said that there's a humor element to this, but it's a very serious subject. It might look like I've being a bit of a comedian, even sort of cracked a joke and said, in my country, I'm quite funny, but I don't know how it's going to go down in Lithuania, which got a few laughs. But generally, the humor and the gallows humor is a massive part of surviving something like that, and a coping mechanism. We had a good gallows humor inside, and that's reflected in the book too. So while it's quite dark and a real torrid subject to talk about, that still gives me goosebumps when I talk about it. There is a bit of humor in there and thrown in, and it's not trying to just sort of drag people down. It's trying to really tell people how to, which you can carry, things you can carry over in normal life, that when things get tough, you can have coping mechanisms, things you can use to deal with that. It's not just to deal with those self-induced pressures and system-induced pressures that I sort of had to deal with. You could sort of transfer those skills into normal life.
Yeah, it's well worth getting this, guys. Live, Fight, Survive, an ex-British soldier's account of courage, resistance, and defiance fighting for Ukraine against Russia. And that Live, Fight, Survive, I believe, was a little kind of maxim that your wife had stated. Is that right? It
is, yeah. She was the last phone calls around sort of the end of March, and I had to give her some news and sense all over. By that time, it was an encirclement of about 200 kilometers deep, so I knew I was either going to have to escape and evade, and we couldn't hold on to the position. And lo and behold, we got the nod to move. And by that time, I'd managed to get a last call out to my wife, who just screamed at me down the phone: "Live, fight, survive. Tell the boys to do an amazing job. You make sure you get home to me." And I thought she was going to burst into tears, but she didn't. She got pretty aggressive and you make sure you get home, which sort of, then I had this mantra rolling around for months and months and months of just, you've got to get through this, you've got to live, fight, survive, keep going, keep pushing. And that's why I named the book after what she said to me.
So what I mean, I know we investigated sort of, and I was asking you probably impertinent questions and in the last interview, and trying to like get inside the head of someone who's gone through these terrible things, and that can often be a little bit close to the bone. But you seem to have coped very well with the ordeals. Are you still in a fairly, I don't say good place? I mean, obviously there will be scars, like mental scars and whatnot. But are you confident that you are in a pretty good place, mentally speaking?
Yeah, but I still watch for those trigger signs. I mean, I get upset at the right times. You've got to remember, I was trained in survival and resistance. I was
Yeah.
the only person, one of the only people who could speak Russian. So my handling is slightly different to someone who's 19, this is their first operation, which 60% of my team, this was their first operation. So they're never going to come back from this, some of those. So I handled it a bit different. I'd had 13 years in the military as well. So I'd done survival, escape, resistance, and evade training for, and the military was my life. This was like my 9th war tour and 13 years in the military. So I pretty much understood what to say and when to say it. I knew the environment was going in. My eyes were wide open when I came here, and I didn't particularly know the political situations quite well, but I could handle my own with Russian and Russian military hardware, and I knew what the Russians were all about. I'd spent 9 years learning how to fight them. So I came here with a lot of confidence, which then I was able to help rebuild the Ukrainian military after the annexation of Crimea, which was initially why I came. I just happened to meet my wife, fell in love with her. She was a deminer on the front lines. So she was actually working on the front lines for a private company.
Is she still doing that?
Deminer. No, she does work for a humanitarian aid group, but she doesn't go demining anymore. And you really can't get close to the front as a civilian contractor demining now. So it's very dangerous here at the moment.
Yeah, and so a couple of things on you talked about being sentenced to death, which goodness, how did that play on your psychology? Did you genuinely think you were going to be executed, or did you have good grounds to think that actually being a British POW, that you would have a value that could see you released?
Well, going back to that, I mean, it's not a natural thing to go through. You get through self-induced pressures and system-induced pressures. Those system-induced pressures you can't really do much about. And I found the self-induced pressures much harder to deal with, because once you've stabbed someone, electrocuted, starved, put them through a sham trial, pulled them out for propaganda, then give them the death penalty, what can you really do to someone after that? You start to develop a resistance then.
Right.
So they know that. So they leave you in a cell for 3 months, climbing the walls 24 hours a day. You're lucky if you've got a window. My isolation cell didn't even have a window. It was underground. So it's freezing. And I didn't see daylight for nearly 2 months, except for when I was pulled out for propaganda. So you've got to keep that. There's nothing you can do about system-induced pressures, but it's over very quickly. Nothing can train you for pain. You've just got to make sure you get through each of those with minimal injury, and have some focus on why you want to get out. If you lose your focus once you're inside somewhere like that, then you're in a difficult world. And I was fully aware of that. We even called it the weight between us. So, alpha males in the military don't really like to talk about our problems very much. It's a bit girly. So by giving it a weight, you knew exactly what people were going through, because even the highest motivated person in there, everybody went through the ups and downs. So then we mucked in as a team, and if somebody was having a bad day, you try and cheer them up. And it was lucky enough that I was actually later on put in cells with other foreigners that had been captured, and then we realized together that we were being set up for a fall. When we pleaded not guilty, we were told we can plead not guilty, and they stopped the trial. And then we were told that if we were to ever get home, then we would have to admit our guilt, and they wanted to get a lesser sentence for us than the death penalty that we could be up for. And then lo and behold, we got the death penalty anyway. Shocker, So it was a trial by, and they run that system pretty much for everybody they capture now. Look at Evan Gershkovich, for instance, exactly what we went through. Look at the American Hubbard that's just been caught now. He was captured when we were captured, so he's had a significant time in Russian prison, and public trial now, and he's probably been tortured as well. Now he's pleaded guilty. That his family said, hold on a minute, he was a teacher. Again, he's been charged as a Nazi mercenary terrorist, which he never set foot outside the country that he had legal status in. So, and he was 72 years old. I mean, the Russians don't really care. They just want it's all projected for their
domestic audience.
Domestic audience, yeah. They're all Nazis,
Yeah. So when, as you were going through that, a couple of things. First of all, what was the most? I know the name of the book is "Live, Fight, Survive," so you had that mantra to hold on to. But what in your brain? Because my goodness, that's a long time to spend alone in isolation with only yourself as company. What do you think about? What was keeping you not going nuts?
The fixation that you don't have your use of your eyes anymore. It might sound weird, but you're in a prison, so everything comes about sensory, about hearing. And about piecing together knowledge when you do go out to these propagandas. I'd had training, so I'm absolutely shocked that how your life really does change, because you then start to piece together what's really important, and changes of pattern. Part of my army career was doing pattern of life studies, so it was amazing to be able to sort of fall back on that and start to build a pattern of life where I could then, after a couple of weeks, start to realize when the environment changed and when we could expect problems, and really start listening to snippets of radio broadcasts and car radios, and trying to get an understanding of what's going on, the environment I'm in. Suddenly I realized when the prison van would turn up, I'd hear the cleaning lady turn up and hear the faulty exhaust she would have before she parked a car. Then you start building all this pattern up in your brain of your environment, and that became my fixation then, about trying to head off the next bit, because I knew if I didn't train my mind, give myself jobs and tasks to do, the minute that sort of stagnate, you end up going down that dark path of I'm never going to get home, scared of everything that comes through the door. And so you have to keep your brain occupied, whether it meant cleaning the toilets, learning and teaching Russian from a dictionary, or building a chess set from bottle tops and bits of stuff. So
I remember you that in the book, that the how you got the dictionary, it was pretty clever. I like that. I won't sort of reveal it. I think people should go and grab the book. It's a really great insight. So with regard to torture and just your time in prison, of course, you would have had no useful information pretty much a few days past when you were incarcerated, right? When you were put in prison.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's nothing, like, the Russians weren't wanting to get anything from you other than for you to say what they wanted you to say in public, I guess. So any other form of torture was just sadism. Is that right?
Yeah, it's well, even if you haven't got any information, if you've been through resistance training like I have, then you're going to get tortured anyway. It's about being a bit clever. I mean, torture, the misconception with torture is people think that you get tortured for information. It doesn't work like that. It's very effective of getting you to admit to things you haven't done and places you haven't been. Yeah. It's amazingly effective because you just want it to stop.
Yeah.
And that's how they use torture. Really, I didn't have any information. They knew that. They knew the positions. They caught me trying to evacuate out of Mariupol. So everybody in Russia's MI6 or Special Services, James Bond, SAS, they're all like, especially if you're British. So it was about putting together a plan that really I could get them on the back foot initially when I was captured, because that's the most dangerous time, that initial capture, because you might have just killed 3 of their mates and in a firefight, and tempers are pretty bad. So as long as you get through that, then the chances of you surviving are a lot better. I was the only guy that had any military training in this specialist sort of environment. So it became about then helping. There's a set of principles you have. If I'm going to get out of this, I need to say I did a good job if I get home. And it might sound weird, but you have to.
Were you training other people? Were you giving hints on, like, were there times in when you're in prison that you weren't being listened to, and could you impart any of this knowledge on other people who needed it?
I think I don't think Paul Uri would mind me talking about him. You know, the British NGO that was working in Ukraine, that wasn't military. He worked for a charity organisation, believe it or not. But Paul Uri was beaten to death in prison with us. But he was very didn't want to listen. And there's not much you can do to someone in prison if they don't want to listen to it. If they think they know better, then you can't really stand out as a leader in prison either. So you don't really want to do that, because you'll just get pulled out for more interrogation and someone that's a problem, and you know, they want to break that. So they don't really want someone in a cell being a leader. So you have to be a bit careful with that. Paul Uri was a lovely guy, but in fact, you know, I go on about RT now, about how they're exactly they're agents of the Kremlin, because they're as bad as the guys who switched the switch, who electrocuted me several times on the ears and my fingers, because they're the guys that are working with the FSB, who tried to cover up Paul Uri's death the day he died on a broadcast out. You know, and I go on about Roman Kozarev, the RT presenter, who's absolutely an accessory to the murder of Paul Uri, who I had no choice in going out. I was hooded, put in a chair, taken to another location, put in a chair. The hood comes off, and there's RT. You're a Nazi mercenary terrorist. The guys that beat you and starve you and are very much the guys behind the camera, who are actually giving you the torture at the black site. So you don't really get a chance. And he's best mates with them. He knows them all. So, you know, it's like, you know, RT have no ethics. They are state controlled, and they are pulling the trigger on these, especially Western POWs, who are made to do interviews regardless. You're not going to say no, because you know, like it was told to me, if you don't do the interview, we're going to make your life hell. They control your food, whether you go outside, and whether you come away with broken ribs at the end of each day. They're the guys that will make your life. And I'd already been electrocuted stuff, so there was not much I could really do about saying no. You know, and I was already made to sign paperwork to say that, you know, that was in another language. They didn't translate it for me. So, you know, I was signing all these confessions. I had no idea. One of the first rules they teach you in survival is don't sign a document in another language. Well, you try doing that for 7 months in a Russian prison and keep your fingers. You're not going to do it.
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh, but yeah, absolutely.
No, and that's the gallows humor of it. You sort of go back to what you made, and you say, well, you know, those small goals are really important. I didn't get beaten up as much as I did as I thought I would. You know, that's
and it's about the thing I picked up from reading a few accounts. I've read Aidan Aslin's book as well. Is about taking control over what you can control. So you talked a lot about that, or a bit about that just now. About, you know, I can't control these external influences, but I can try and control my internal pressures and what goes on in this immediate environment and in here. And so therefore it's creating these little goals, like manageable goals and wins. So it's like, this is me against them. How can I get a win? And it might be completely irrelevant to them. And it might be they'd never have any clue about that. But you get a little win by, I got to do that today. And they don't know about that. Yeah, that's a win.
And it does, and it grows. The confidence grows. So when we changed prisons, we were able to fight back like the Great Escape and start putting plans together. And it became about that. It's about imparting your knowledge without looking like you'd had any training, and being a bit clever and political. I'm 50 years old. For me, you know, I've had a long career. So for me, some people are just different faces, same characters. You know, you can put them in the pub at home and suddenly they're in Ukraine, but they've just got different faces. So people become, you know, quite similar in their patterns. Humans are similar anyway. You know, the army, they say don't set patterns. We're the worst at it. You know, so when you start realizing guard changes are moving around, and then you think, hold on a minute, the guy was dead. I get up, they wake me up, the buzzer goes, at 6:30, the guy comes in and changes the bucket. Why is 2 hours later I'm sitting here, he hasn't turned up? And then the guard change, you hear that at 8:30, suddenly it's 20 minutes after you're woken up, and sometimes it's 2 hours you're waiting before the guard change. Well, everybody knows who served in the military that guard changes are rigorous at the same time every day. So you start to question, hold on a minute, they're messing around with the buzzer times, disorientators. So you start to put things together and you start, and you start to realize they're actually torturing you because the light's on 24 hours a day. They're playing around with the buzzer time, which they tell you is 6 and 10 to put you to sleep and wake you up in the morning, but they're not. It's like some days you could go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, some days you'll be up at 5, some days you'll be up at 8, just completely disorient. So when you go outside, you don't even know what time of the day is. Once a time I went out, I thought it was morning. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because when I got taken to the prosecutor's office, it was a clock on the wall and a window open, which I write about. And I could see normality outside the window, which was really strange. And every time I sort of gives you another view on life, really, because you look at that normality now and you take it for granted. But when you're in a situation like that and life after, you go, well, could be worse. There was this one time in Russia, when anybody asks, and it's you sort of develop that humor, and it's a massive part of being able to cope with something as dramatic as that in life.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in your book you also mentioned the scare quotes journalist Graham Phillips. Can you?
Yeah, Aidan got interviewed with Graham Phillips. I had Roman Kazarev. He was a Wall Street journalist. He was a RT. I don't call them journalists. I mean, they're not journalists. They're paid by Russian state. So, that's a big bone of contention I fight with RT now and push, because if you're paid by a foreign state and going against your own country's policies, like Graham Phillips is doing with RT, then you really are playing on the borders of sedition, treason, and you are treasonous. And now they've just... the same people, RT, are funding influencers in America, and that's borderline out to treason, really. So you've picked your side. You're going to have to live with that forever. And Graham Phillips is another one who interviewed Aidan Aslin. I mean, Aidan's wrote a different book about a similar situation, who had a completely different experience, because one, he had no military experience, nothing to fall back on. So he looks at it a completely different way. And also he was pulled out because he had 130,000 followers on his Twitter account. So, it's a completely different outlook he's got, and his story and how his books about.
Yeah, I mean, he had the experience of fighting for the YPG in Syria, right, and in that neck of the woods, and so he had but no formal kind of military training. So he had this kind of bizarre background that brought him into
eclectic, I would say.
Yeah. And so it's a very different story.
Yeah, and he's younger as well. This was his first real conflict as such. I mean, he'd been on the front, but in a militia and in working with the Kurds is not anything like fighting Russians. And now they've got air superiority. So, you're dealing with that. And you're dealing with the fact they are a professional military, not, a bunch of Islamic terrorists that don't have any aeroplanes. It's all very, very rarely in water, So it's a whole different environment. And how he dealt with it is totally different to the way I dealt with it. So...
yeah, it's incredible that you get these people who are... like, deep inside, do they realize that they're really fighting for the wrong side? Is there some knowledge? Are they just grifting, or are these just truly warped people that have gone through this process of aligning themselves with I mean, with regard to Graham Phillips, it says here, is a British journalist, self-styled indie journo, documentary filmmaker and former YouTuber who is under UK government sanctions for producing and publishing pro-Russian disinformation and propaganda about the Ukraine war. The sanctions on Phillips are an asset freeze, etc., and his connections to RT and so on and so forth. He's just a very bad human being. But yeah, you wonder, like, at base, like, how have they got to where they've got to? And you would have met many people, Ukrainians, who will be aligned to the Russian narrative, and people have their different journeys for getting to where they get to, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, it's Russia had 2 years prior to the invasion to prepare for this war. So they were pumping out this propaganda that Ukrainian were Nazis. When I was in the army then, so I tried to stay low key, but your sort of hands are tied when you're in the military. You can't really be as like I am now talking to you about different parts of the bad parts of the good. Your sort of hands are a bit tied in the military. So I couldn't sort of make myself publicly known, but I found myself fighting in Mariupol because it wasn't like anything he was saying, because it wasn't like, Russia invaded in 2014. Even Igor Gherkin, who's topical at the moment, has said he has come clean and now he's in prison because he's telling everybody it's his master plan, And then you hear the annexation of Crimea, they didn't do a referendum before they held everybody up at gunpoint. And again, there's a great video clip of Igor Gherkin saying, yeah, we got all of them up in gunpoint, and we took them to this room and, I can play the clip. It's just phenomenal. And there was no talk about NATO problems when they invaded Crimea. This is a new thing later on.
This is I've talked about this loads, Shaun, which is like the idea that NATO expansionism, which is what we hear from. I've got friends who will give me this kind of nonsense. Oh, it was because NATO expanded. It's like, if that was really an issue, they would have been talking about that in 2014, but it was not on the agenda then. And that's really interesting you say that as well.
You got 10,000 green men and moved them into East Ukraine, took all the patches off. It was well documented. I mean, Vice News did some amazing stuff at the time, trying to track these Russians down in Russia who had been in Ukraine with pictures of them in Ukraine. It's like, it was fundamentally, and then you hear the next one is the American coup in 2014 that ousted Yanukovych from, and I was like, really? If you ask most Americans, they've got such a bad view of their CIA. 1 minute they're crap and they can't protect Trump and do all this stuff.
Good point.
And then they think they're amazing CIA guys that could topple a country. It's so confusing. And the same people are saying the same things. It's MAGA, it's the Republicans. They can't protect Trump. They can't do it. They're inept. They can't do it. Defund them. And then it's like, talking about Ukraine, they're amazing. They managed to topple the Ukrainian government and do a coup in 2014.
Just like,
You're like,
it's like climate change. Humans can't affect climate. Humans can't affect the weather. And then last week it's like, oh, the Democrats have just created the hurricane, two hurricanes. It's like, hang on, I thought, well, anyway. Really good point. The other argument, of course, concerning the little green men that's interesting is that you had the DPR, LPR just kind of starting up, and then suddenly, like within a few weeks of starting up, they had all these towed howitzers and armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting
Soviet-made military equipment.
And someone pointed out quite rightly, no other group on earth has ever had that much equipment after just starting up. And suddenly, and of course, it's they could buy it off eBay. It's like BS. That is the Russian equipment trundled over the border. Yeah.
Then they used Ukraine as a polygon, so it became a trading area. So they were using that over the 8 years and prepping, probably I would say 12 months to 2 years prior to the full-scale invasion, by bringing Western accented failed media guys who would come over and start pushing it, like Graham Phillips and Patrick Lancaster and Americans and Jay Bowers and Steve Sweeney and people like that, and now working for RT, which is like a state-controlled media.
Well, I mean, we're often critical about the Russian military, and for good reasons. They win en masse, right? Or they gain the advantage, or they take territory because of mass, right? But actually, they've not shown themselves to be very good. But where Russia is very good is with disinformation campaigns. And like I've long said, if they had taken the amount of money they spent on this war, didn't invade, and then piled that money into bot and troll farms, they would have had much greater effect on the. Imagine how many hundreds of billions of dollars this war has cost Russia. Just invest that in disinformation projects, and you would have screwed over the world.
Exactly. I mean, I just had a conversation with Cormac Smith about that. I mean, we're bumping on same topics at the moment about America, but you've got to remember, bots aren't voters. I think people forget this. Really good point. And you've just got. I just get attacked to no end now. If I don't see each day should have killed you when we had you in Donetsk, or are you going to go back and fight? Or some people even put, if you feel that passionate, go and fight. And I'm like, really? Are we going to have to go through this again every time? You know, so it becomes like you can spot these bots a mile away. And I could put one tweet up and I'll hit, you know, 1,500 bots are just with three or four words with the same repetitive scenario of, you know, you're Nazis and you sort of become used to it. It becomes white noise after a while. So I don't really, you know, if you've got an opinion, you certainly don't go anonymous. It has no value. You know, for me, I'm Shaun Pinner. On Twitter, I'm Shaun Pinner. On Instagram, Shaun Pinner. If I have a view, I put it out. If somebody wants to tell me that it's wrong, I would want them to be themselves and say it's wrong. You know, we don't have to. But the amount of, you know, anonymous people think it's perfectly justified to start swearing at you because they believe that Russia said you were Nazi. So you have to be. Hold on a minute. Russia invaded Ukraine with Nazi paramilitaries and PMCs. Wagner named after Hitler's favorite composer, run by Ukraine, who was a neo-Nazi.
He had the SS like paraphernalia tattooed
on his chest. Yeah, and then you've got I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but you've got Mobilisation Group, who's a Nazi paramilitary that's now patrolling the borders of Finland. So you know, and you sit there, and I'm going, I'm from Mariupol. Where are you from? Montana. And suddenly he knows more than I do about me. And I've lived in Mariupol for 8 years, worked with Ukrainians. And I sort of tell him, you know, Russia invaded with Nazi paramilitaries. Then you find you're talking to a St. Petersburg bot farm for a wasted 20 minutes of your life talking to that nugget because he's got an American picture. And I've done that before. I fell for it, you know, and he's got an American flag on his, the American veteran starter kit on his profile. And you just realize, hold on a minute, that's a bot farm in St. Petersburg telling me that, you know.
And I have to catch myself because I was looking at some stuff this morning, researching for my American elections video, and there was a thing about Kamala Harris on the Hispanic TV show Interview, and it was a really moving clip, right? But someone in the audience was crying and asking this very emotional question. She reacted with empathy, and it was quite a beautiful clip. Kamala Harris showing her real humanity there. And then straight underneath, there were all these like American flag people, blue ticks, going, and I was like, right, I was like, no, these are Russians. These are Russian people. And there's this, you hinted at it earlier, which is, you know, someone like, and to use an example, say Marjorie Taylor Greene, who spouts this stuff, then gets all of this support from these trolls from Russia. And then there is this possibly, hopefully, this difference between her perceived level of support and actual support. And she will find at the ballot box, or probably not her, she's in a very Republican area, but some of these people will find that when they go to actually get the votes in, those trolls can't vote. And that all that support they're getting on the internet is actually Russian support, and it doesn't necessarily exist in their actual local environment. But anyway, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we haven't got time for that.
yeah. So, right. Okay. So you are now living in Dnipro. What are you doing with yourself now? And talk us through your journey at the moment.
Well, my life sort of changed after I was exchanged. I had a bit of a break, and then I was convinced to write the book because, and I'm not, you know, it's not a cheap plug as somebody just, but, you know, I wrote a book because it's better to write an account. I wanted to tell our story really of what happened from our perspective, because obviously we were paraded and propagandized on a fake sham trial for being mercenaries and Nazis. And really, I'd lived in Mariupol, and I was absolutely livid how we were portrayed to the general, firstly the Russian public before our trial, and then what went out to America and what went out to the West, because, you know, as you know, RT still pushes their narrative out on Twitter in various countries, and still pushing out the Shaun Pinner's a Nazi and a terrorist. And I wanted to go, hold on a minute, we were tortured, you know, we were starved. We didn't see any humanitarian aid while we were there, you know, and the Russians had a massive, so it was about telling our story, which we weren't allowed to tell until we were exchanged. Which again, I think people like Graham Phillips, this was his time to shine. He was eyes lit up. He thought this is a career defining moment. And interviewed, or what I say is interrogated, Aidan Aslin with the very guys that stabbed him and beaten him up, with no ethics, no professional journalism, which was one of the most uncomfortable views you will ever see. And I had a similar with Roman Kazarev, and I wanted to talk about those links. And then suddenly when I got out, I had sort of 30 people on my Twitter account that suddenly over 2 years, just by tweeting real things that are happening, backing it up with facts, talking from the ground here and actually telling people, has now gone to nearly 30,000 people. And now I do podcasts, written a book. The book's going to be made into another platform and a film for which is looking at making next year. And so it's about getting onto this media and sort of saying, actually, it's not as the Russia has been building up to this war. And now you've got things like Iran are supplying ballistic missiles and drones to Russia to commit the genocide in Ukraine. So now you have, Iran denying, even in October 2022, saying that they're not supplying any drones to Russia. But, Shaheed isn't a Russian word and Shaheed isn't a Ukrainian word. So, but it's damn sure an Iranian word. Yeah. So these Shaheed drones that we eventually proved that were being shipped into Russia, now they're shipping ballistic missiles in and killing.
And of course, North Korea as well. Throw the North Koreans in.
So we're now just pushing it in and sort of explaining to people that there's a coalition that came in and started to invade a European nation, including North Korea and Iran, are part of a coalition of Russia, who are now trying to topple a democratically elected government in Europe. And people don't even talk about this now. It's all being hushed over and downplayed.
Do you know what? You're absolutely bloody right, Shaun. So it's this idea that sometimes we forget what's right in front of us and how to couch what's going on. So we're so invested. I'm so invested in this war, like psychologically and emotionally and politically. But actually, to couch it like that, which is, you do realize that there is a country that has got together with North Korea and Iran and is invading a European nation. Like you do remember this is happening, guys. Like, and everyone's arguing about what we should do about it. We should bloody well be doing everything we freaking can.
Because if we lose this and we lose Ukraine, they're going to be only 2 hours by plane from UK. At the moment, they're in Russia. It's a longer journey. They're going to be a missile distance. They're going to be even close to the UK. So you would think that your vested interest is to support Ukraine. But Russian money, Russian influence, propaganda has had 3 years to fest and manifest and get into the psyche of Brits. And then you've got paid influencers. You've got, Russians taking Russian money. Russian money has a massive influence in this. And when that all runs out, which it will do, we're not going to have long enough to talk about everything, I don't think. But, when it does run out, which it's looking incredibly bad at the moment. You just had this week Kadyrov with death feuds. You've had massive amount of Russian amount of military jailed for corruption. There's a massive purge and coal going on in the Kremlin that doesn't even get reported about in Western media.
So this is interesting. So let's take it in this direction then. So I don't know much about this feud going on between Kadyrov and a Dagestani politician, an MP member of the Duma. But there is this, because I was saying, look, what Ukraine want is as much discord in Russia as possible. It doesn't matter what form it's in. It can be economic, social, issues with welfare, people on the ground having money spent on the war and not spent on hospitals. And, you want everyone to be as unhappy as possible and blame the war for their woes. And then you want, when Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord, is sending Akhmat special forces, or I know many of them are now Russian, but the idea you got Chechens being sent to Ukraine to fight. If he's then having an issue with some spat over there, then that's good for Ukraine, because those people I need you back. And actually, so what's your take on what's good? Do you know much about what's going on with Kadyrov?
I can't tell you there's going to be a massive fall tomorrow. There's going to be Putin's going to be. I just don't think that's going to happen. But something is happening right now in Russia. Let's not take that away. Firstly, the invasion into Kursk caused a massive. They're trying to downplay that, but that is really the social contract that's been broken between Putin and the Russian people has really left, and he's leaving it to fester. And it's like,
is that true?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's festering. Plus, you've got the economic aspect to Russia at the moment. We still talk to people there. One of my big things I push at the moment is we're very, very soon going to have back the digital Iron Curtain, with Russia going back to North Korea. We will lose comms, I think, eventually with people in the occupied territories. And even this week, they've just banned Discord. So, it's been going on for quite a while. Plus, you've then got over the last, I'd say, 6 months, the massive cull, and which we thought was reshifted of people. But now, even this week, you've had several high priority people within Moscow now being investigated for corruption. You've got the FSB now taking over military aspects of the Ministry of Defense. You've got family members now being promoted to places where you would think, hold on a minute, there's a lot of insecurity, a lot of problems. And then you've got the economic problems with Russia too. My friends over there telling me it's like 70% on basic goods. They can't get stuff in. Ban on petrol exports, ban on sugar exports. Now you've got Ukraine hitting ammo dumps and oil facilities. The production's down. Gazprom's got record losses. Their cash cow is taking huge losses. So, and the money, the false economy and the GDP that they spend. I'm not an economist, so there may be some bits I get wrong, but I've had to learn on the job and live next door to Russia for 8 years. So, but you've now got pretty much people, in Russia starting asking questions more now than ever. I saw a survey done where only 28% of the people are behind the war now. But now
down from 38% last year, which was I think the question. Yeah, I think the question was: is it doing more harm than good? Or in that case, 28% say more good than harm. In other words, support for the war really is really low. And it's so. This is my view, Shaun, is that when you look at the macro side of things, Ukraine is just in a much better position. Russia is far more precarious, and they are damaging themselves on a generational scale here. Like, Russia is going to be a pariah state and an economic, unless Trump wins and reverses the sanctions, which is potential. Hopefully,
in my view, that's all he's going for. He hasn't got anything else. He can't win militarily, so he's absolutely pushing his bets on Trump.
Yes.
Now, what's going to happen if Trump doesn't get in? And then you've got what you've got is the American election stifling Ukraine, which gets underreported, downplayed. So you've got the first reason, which is you've got now our inability to make a decision in the West of whether we can use long-range rockets in Russia. That's now not going to be made until after the elections, which is killing Ukrainians on a daily basis here. Literally, Kharkiv's getting smashed. Kherson's now being directly targeted by drones and directly attacking civilians. Nothing said by Antonio Guterres or UN or underreported. And we've got independent reporters over here, people like me, who are arguing this case going, why is nobody doing anything about this? Yeah. It's mass genocide. And then the biggest problem you've got is the Democrats' containment issues about trying to contain everything and painting this picture that, the Middle East is, a safer place now than it ever was just before October the 7th. What you've got now is Russia is, in fact, in an alliance with Iran. And the war in Ukraine and Russia is extended to the Middle East, but nobody wants to admit it. They're burying their head in the sand and not dealing with it. And to the point where Nikki Haley was actually saying after October the 7th that they had proof that Russia was training Hamas terrorists before the October the 7th slaughter in Israel. Now, that makes perfect. Why is nobody talking about it now? Because the election. Nobody wants to bring this shit up.
You're absolutely right. The election is a real problem because, unfortunately, the Ukraine war has become a partisan issue, which means that even if you really support Ukraine, if you talk about that as leading on that, then it means that the other side has to say, well, if they're really in support of Ukraine, then we can't be in support of them. So we have to be against them. So if they support Ukraine, we're going to be against Ukraine. So the Democrats can't lead on Ukraine. If it's asked of them, then, for example, Kamala Harris has been quite strong in her rhetoric on Ukraine, which is really good, and calling Putin a murderous dictator. I think that's brilliant. But they can't go and campaign on Ukraine because it then becomes partisan, and that's really divisive. So the reality of it can't really be any other way at the moment. The reality is we just need the freaking elections out the way. We need a responsible leader in the US who is going to be strong for Ukraine and against Putin. And I've got my very clear opinions on who that will be, but we just need the elections out of the way. And I think that's what you're saying. And I completely agree.
Yeah, I don't want to be American passionate because it's not entirely all there, but it's the elections, and they've been a great help. And I must say,
yeah, absolutely, it's the nature of the beast.
And so I just want to make that clear.
Agree.
What we've got is the problem that the European nations are looking to America still, you know, and they don't want to make a decision without America behind them, which I think is weak of the West too. You know, we have got an economy that's bigger than Russia.
But yet, yes and no. So on things like storm shadows and distant strikes deep into Russia, as far as I understand it, actually most of Europe has made that decision. Like UK, France are fine with that. It's the Americans still not doing that. But yeah, in general, there is still, obviously, America is the biggest nation in the world in terms of power and military, and so there is still this, you know, America decides, we follow type thing. And so yeah, that is the case.
No, it is. You know, and now Zelensky's gone into Kursk off his own back. It was one of the best OPSEC missions I think has ever happened.
We talked about this before. I agree.
Until the pager incident in Iran, where, you know, that's been an amazing clandestine operation. You know, whether you agree with it or not, that's a massive intelligence operation there. But, you know, in the second to that this year, you know, that has to be, Kursk has to be one of the best this day and age, with satellites and ground surveillance and drone coverage and CCTV and OPSEC within your units. And that's one of the best pulled off operations going. Where did we get the praise for that? No. It's been, you know, poo-pooed from the start until I was telling people, hold on a minute, wait. Just wait. Everybody's undervaluated Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. There's only a few of us here going, it ain't going to be a walkover. You know, it's not going to. You don't really understand what Russia doesn't understand what it's coming into. You know, we've totally been underestimated. And then when the balance of Russia's taken a small amount of land or a small village, they don't talk about the amount of troops that they sacrificed. They just really talk about Russians winning, Russians taking this back. Where's our? We've taken back over 50% of what Russia initially captured in the initial invasion, knocked them out Kiev, taken the Black Sea fleet, 35% of the Black Sea fleet has now been sunk. You know, we don't have a conventional navy, you know, even a submarine. You know, we don't have a conventional navy, yet we've stopped the blockade of the Black Sea, recontrolled safe shipping routes, you know, all out. You know, we pushed them back, retook Kherson City. You know, I know we're starting to get you know, the failed counter operations that Ukraine mounted, but that was largely down to pressure by NATO asking the impossible from Ukrainians that they wouldn't do themselves. No air superiority, no F-16s that they promised. Going forward and break through, you're never going to do it. It was an impossible task, and the Ukrainians were very quick to try it and pull it and stop it. But they've always been very good at this, active defense, which is, you know, being aggressive, but pulling them into killing field, challenge them in. You know, you want to lose 20,000 men trying to take a city you've just completely destroyed that's inhabitable? Keep coming. We'll just push back. And they've always been good at doing that sort of tactic of active defense.
So you've talked about Kursk, because I'm a really big advocate of Kursk, and we talked about this when we were on Silicon Curtain previously. But for the audience today, like, I am a big advocate for the Kursk offensive for a whole bunch of reasons. I think it was the only place that you could attack where you would take serious amounts of ground, not meet much resistance, not have the fortifications, not lose your own equipment and personnel, have huge PR and morale impact on Russia, also cause strategic implications for Russia in having to draft troops back from Mali and from all around Russia, etc., and etc., and have some operational gains as well. I think that you would never have had any of those successes had they put those Ukrainian troops into, say, Pokrovsk. You just would have stalled the Russians a bit more in Pokrovsk. Okay, I think losing area in Pokrovsk but taking Kursk is a much better calculation. So I think Kursk has been a success, and even if they are losing parts of Kursk right now, that's exactly what they were kind of setting up, which is, we want you to pour 50,000 troops into Kursk, and yeah, we will lose that back to Russia, but it comes at a cost in terms of your attrition of troops and material. But the cost for you of not having 50,000 troops down here on the east or wherever doing whatever. So that's my appraisal of Kursk. But you hear about criticisms of Kursk from like Ukrainians on the ground in Pokrovsk, naturally, who are under the cosh. Everything's going shit for them. They are in trouble. And they're thinking, well, why are we supplying troops up to Kursk when no one's got my back here in Pokrovsk? And I get that. So I wanted to ask you, as someone who has fought on the front lines themselves in this conflict, and it's been in the UK armed forces, I sense that there's a real big difference between a macro view of how things are going and the decisions made by people much further up the chain of command that have a lot of sense when you have an idea of all of the information, compared to someone that's down on the ground here that doesn't even know what the next unit over there is doing, then complaining about things happening up and down a front line, because from their little point of view, the world is crap and it's all terrible. And why aren't you supporting me? So sorry for all that preamble. What's your view on that? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, you get caught in your own bubble, and you have to filter out what's going on at ground level. I'd sort of manage that information at high level too. I come to a comparison. What you've got is miserable, and glide bombs are position killers. You only have to be caught up in one. It doesn't have to kill you or maim you, but you're not fighting again because your faculties are all gone. You're not in a position to be able to fight. You might have all your kit blown off you, and then you might be injured as well. So, their world is about trying to survive each day on the front line and taking each hour as it comes. And that can get miserable. And someone like me, using my background in the military, that's where I became invaluable to my unit, because a lot of the training, a lot of you understand that as being a senior guy, a senior NCO. You understand you've had 13 years experience. There isn't much you haven't seen. You understand the battle picture. You understand the geopolitics and the political side of it, why people would do it. And it's people like me that then talk to the younger lads who are 19, 18. This is why we're doing it. This is what's happening. The problem you've got now on the front lines in Ukraine is most of those guys are either dead, captured, or in, the ones that did survive are training other guys up. And you're lacking a lot of experience, but the Russians are too, which don't even get a very good report. So what you're lacking is you've got those guys that with that experience who unfortunately are now, both sides are lacking. So you've got a lot of, now it's become about how you train the troops the quickest and to what standard and what equipment is a major importance now with, and obviously we're getting F-16s and better gear. And so it's about people from the outside world, like the volunteers that come over and train these Ukrainian troops about NATO tactics, and you're giving experiences to them. I mean, I do a bit of that, talking about conduct after capture, what you can expect if you're captured, and the best chances, to give you alive. The politicians and the generals up there are not going to be worried too much about that because they've got bigger pictures. So you're battling two different bubbles, really. And it's down to senior people to really sort of join those bubbles up. And the information bubbles there to say, look, this has got a bigger picture, but I think Kursk was an amazing operation. I think it still is. I think the intelligence that we gathered in the FSB documents that are greatly underreported, gave us great insight into what Russia was thinking, which nobody really talks about. The bases that we took over in Kursk, the Russian occupied positions, all that intelligence is amazing. And when I was captured, the Russians really are petrified of Budanov and the SBU and their capabilities, because what the SBU are really good at doing is setting all these partisan groups. What you've got to remember, all these hits are people telling information getting out to the higher ups about what to hit, where to hit, what time to hit it. And now you don't really suffer really as much as the Russians are suffering with that in Ukraine. But you know damn well that the Russians are suffering it, because you've just hit the massive oil port in Crimea that's still burning 3 or 4 days, or the ammo dumps on the front lines that are being picked up. So what you've got to realise, the Russians are exceptionally scared of the SBU, because, one, the SBU know all the tactics that the Russians know, but have picked up new ones along the way from friends in the West. So that has a major input how the partisan activity in Russia moves forward. And I should think, and that's what's given me a good indication to why I think at some point you will have an iron curtain in Russia to stop this partisan activity, to stop people talking for one another, control the masses in Russia.
Yeah. It's interesting that Telegram has just banned some Russian channels as well. So I think Telegram is now starting to toe the party line with sanctions and whatnot. And as you said earlier, Discord's been shut down actually by Russia. That wasn't a Western shutting down. That was Russia shutting Discord down, which has annoyed many of their military personnel, because they actually use it effectively as a communications tool. But
and they've slowed their own social media down. So they make cheap copies of what's already out there, and then slow the actual Western media down to virtually, crap.
YouTube has pulled out of Russia, so this virtual curtain is being re-erected.
It's slowly being erected, and now you've got Unilever's just announced this week they're pulling out of Russia and Belarus. Sorry, brain's gone. I've been talking all day. So Belarus. So you now got all of these. It's not going well in Russia. And the reason you see all these high-value arrests and corruption is because Putin doesn't know who to trust anymore. He's lost all his, the Ministry of Defense. He wants his FSB in there taking control. Now it's going to be a police state, unfortunately, controlled by the special police and, family. It's becoming even more of a controlling dictatorship than it was before, and it's going to get even worse, I should think.
Well, as we do this kind of the last section of the talk with you, Shaun, so I'm interested in word on the ground as what you're hearing about people's attitudes towards X, Y, and Z. And we'll get onto that in a second. But with regards to sort of Kursk and the Eastern Front, I've been long thinking, or at least I'm under the understanding that Ukraine has increased their mobilization. So yes, it came too late, etc., but they are getting people trained up. You've got the 2,300 being trained in France and equipped with all French equipment. You've got Operation Interflex in the UK still taking place. You've got no doubt stuff happening in Czechia and Poland and Germany, etc., all that's going on. Are you under the impression that the Ukrainians do have a bunch of reserves that they are not pulling into action because they're not ready yet, and actually they don't want to just throw people? That would be a real bad PR stunt, even though they're desperate for rotation and troops down on the Eastern Front. Do the Ukrainians have some reserves in the pipeline, and how confident are you that Ukraine can kind of stop the rot in the East and so on and so forth?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, there's a lot of stuff I can't really talk about that I'm privy to that I won't talk about because I still work with a lot of people. What it is it's very hard on the front lines with a lot of places that should have more people than they should have. Like I said, you alluded to, the glide bombs are position killers. We need to stop them. Why isn't anybody doing anything about it? Why isn't the West acting on it? Baffling, absolutely baffling. So there's your first problem. It's the West's reluctance to deal with these glide bombs and deal with managing that situation just by totally ignoring it. And then you've got the actual ammunition shortage that we had last year that stretched into this year, where we almost lost Ukraine with some of the horror stories that we were witnessing on the front. We actually were packing our stuff ready to bolt because we didn't know at any point whether there would be Ukraine, because the horror stories on the front with guys just using smoke on, you know, Russian section attacks, and we didn't know where the next lot of ammo was coming in. And then it takes 7 months to put all that, rectify that. People think, oh well, you've just got a 93 billion deal, so you know, what's your problem? And that's like a week after it's done, and you're thinking, hold on, we just had nearly a year of no weapons. So that's going to take it's going to take at least several months to get all those, with a logistics that's already strained because of the Russia invasion. And at that point, Russia also launched its Kursk, from Kursk, its operation into Kharkiv. So a lot of the problems we've got now is because of our inability to act, our slowness, the fact that it's taken this long to get weapons. And that's not all America, that's Britain, that's Europe. But it takes a democracy. I always said, once the gears get grinding, then it's going to be very hard to stop. Europe's now building factories to supply Ukraine, and there's a chance, the projections, some projections I've seen, that we could actually be producing more artillery shells than the Russians very shortly.
So you know, this is that macro view that I'm always much more bullish about Ukraine's position when you zoom out and you see what the US is doing in terms of these structural changes to the manufacturing and what the EU is doing and this procurement that's taking place. And I think, well, all of this equipment that Ukraine is getting from their allied nations, Russia's not getting. Yeah, they might be getting the odd bit from North Korea and Iran. Yes, missiles and artillery ammunition is an issue. But actually, for every tank and infantry fighting vehicle and Mirage 2000 and F-16 that Ukraine is receiving, Russia aren't. And so you can be really positive from that larger picture. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
And no, and you've got the addition of the fact that they're far more advanced in the drones than Russia is. Also, you've got, just in the last couple of weeks, Zelensky announcing the first Ukrainian own built ballistic missiles. That's going to change the whole ball game again. So, you know, you can see all this from living here. You can probably see more living here. And when I go out, I end up talking about what's happening in Ukraine. And when I go out from Ukraine, I end up and come back in. I always tend to what's going on the outside world, you know. So I run an English speaking class or a club with a friend of mine. He set this up, and I pop in now and again. And what was like 6 or 7 people when I turn up is now 30 people, and it's like I'm the news of the day. What's going on? Who are you speaking to? What journalists have you spoken to? What politicians are you speaking to? What's happening? But it gives me a really good understanding at ground level what's happening and what they're thinking, because they write letters for a podcast. I do letters from Ukraine. I go and jump on there occasionally and give them letters from people on the ground here. And, you know, mobilisation is a massive problem for them here. It's been a balls up for the word go, to be fair. So that's well known that it's a major concern for people, and that's not because probably what you think. A lot of Ukrainians still want to fight, but they just don't want to waste their life. You know, what's the point in fighting if you're not going to get any backing from America? We are killing ourselves. We are killing Ukrainians just because of our lack of making decisions and supporting Ukraine, because they're now sitting there going, well, if we're not getting any weapons, or we're not getting any ammunition, why am I going to risk my life on the front line?
Yeah.
This shouldn't be like that.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to get Russia out, you want to win. And a lot of that is about the containment policy that Jake Sullivan's using and is well documented, and Biden are talking about, which is this containment, that it's not a global war. It's Ukraine and Russia and Iran and Israel. Hold on. It's not, actually. And Jake said it's not contained, because now you have Iran helping Russia attack and try and topple a democratically elected government inside Europe by supplying drones and ballistic missiles with North Korea. And yet people are still like, la, 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 it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. So, you know, part of what I do now is I was quite shy as a kid. I sort of go on and talk to people like you and other podcasts and say, have you thought about joining these lines. Have you thought about drawing these dots? Because
Mate, I spend my day drawing those bloody lines. Don't you worry about that.
Me too. I got like a spider board. It's like red lines everywhere going, But
so it's
no,
really
I mean,
interesting. There's a new book by Anne Applebaum. So Anne Applebaum is a famous like American journalist and thinker, and she's married to Radoslav Sikorski, who's a Polish foreign minister. She's just written a book called Autocracy Inc., which is about how all of these autocratic regimes around the world are linked, either kind of formally or informally, and that there is, and I haven't read it yet, but it's next on my list, and this is a worry. It's all the links that exist between these really deeply problematic regimes that we need to be uniting against, and we seem to be sleepwalking somewhat whilst electing governments that are also quite preferential to these sort of regimes, and yeah, it's all a bit, but anyway, so you have your ear close to the ground. What are the views then? So yes, mobilization is an issue. What are the general views? How's the morale for the Ukrainian people?
Well, it depends where you go. I mean, if you're in Kiev and Lviv, and it's totally different to where somewhere if you're in Kharkiv and Kherson at the moment. Kherson's being hit by directly targeted drones, are directly targeted civilians. I mean, there's massive proof of it. Yeah, like we touched on earlier, where's Antonio Guterres condemning Russia? No, he goes and visits them, goes to BRICS, and absolutely strange behaviour. And I know some good people in the UN, and one of them said to me, apologised for actually working for the UN. I know we're not flavour of the month for the moment. I said, you don't have to apologise, mate. You do some good work. It's not you I'm pissed off with. It's
yeah.
But if you have to start apologising for your organisation,
yeah. I like when I went around Ukraine, I was in the battle bus, as we called it, with Greg Terry, who's another YouTuber, and Zhenya, and they've been helping Ukraine. Zhenya's Ukrainian, but Greg's been doing charity work in Ukraine for 26 years. And in the back, it was myself and Pierre, who's been volunteering off and on in Kramatorsk area for a couple of years. And he's got this gig doing photojournalism for the UN out in Africa, actually, where the UN is looking forward at what the world is going to look like in 30 years' time, and is there going to be enough farmland, and what's global warming doing in terms of the efficiency of farmland and this and that. Fascinating speaking to him this morning. I was like, do you know what? The UN is really bloody good as an organization that has the humanity's best interests at heart, whereas like, who else is thinking about whether there's going to be enough food to feed the world, not just our country, but the world in like 30 years' time? So the UN does such incredibly valuable work that most of us do not realize takes place. There's stuff going on out there, like talking to them about like the programs that are taking place to ensure the security of the world in 30 years' time. The UN does phenomenal work. But also, the UN is toothless and doesn't do enough. And Antonio Guterres is a great example of where it can go wrong. And, Ukraine is a great example of that. So it's worth having a nuanced, I think, approach to the UN. But yeah, sorry, anyway.
Yeah, I know. I totally agree with you on that. I keep telling people on my Twitter account, you can still be a humanitarian. You can still be very upset of what's happened in Palestine. I think, my personal view is that I think you can go over the top, but what you have to realise is that, Russia have potentially trained Hamas terrorists to then start pour fuel on embers of a problem that we should have sorted a very long time ago. And unfortunately, yes, I don't agree with everything that's gone in there. But if push comes to shove, I'm going to sit there and say, hold on a minute, Russia has really, really pushed and thrown petrol on the embers of the Middle East, trying to extend a war which really only benefits one person, and that's Putin's agenda in Ukraine. And you touched on the farmland. I mean,
Putin's agenda in the US as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ukraine, Russia wants that. It's the breadbasket of Europe. It wants to control that. This whole thing in Ukraine has been a land grab, and I've been documented as saying that for several years. It's a whole thing has absolutely been a land grab. And what you've got to understand is this has nothing to do with Nazis. They're narratives to push an agenda to basically steal all the Azov coast and take farmland, rich farmland, industrial and still manufacturing in Mariupol. They desperately want Dnipro, and they want all the old rocket and potential factories and the infrastructure in Dnipro. And also they're pushing on Kursk and Kherson, and and their policy is really to terrorize, target civilians, because they're hoping that the civilians will then turn on the government. So they have no problems in hitting cancer hospitals, children's cancer hospitals in Kremlin. Why does anybody think Russia has any morals? They don't. They haven't. They've just stolen my house in Mariupol, whacked over 25,000 people and killed them, predominantly Russian-speaking Ukrainians, including women and children. And that's just Mariupol. Potentially there's maybe 80 to 90,000, 100,000 people in they've killed in. His first narrative was to save Russian speakers. Well, he's murdered 100,000 of them. What's the first thing he's done? We have families still there. So they tell us they've moved a load of Russians in. Chechens are in the area. There's now corruption, rife corruption. Renamed the streets, missed plots of land off, sold it off in big corruption scandals, which are now making Ukrainians, if you don't take a Russian passport, making them second-degree citizens. You can't even get basic humanitarian rights in Mariupol unless you take a Russian passport. All of that, plus taking 700,000 kids, from the occupied territories, from Ukrainian families, according to Chief Child Catcher Maria Lvova-Belova. So, which is an ICC wanted war criminal for. He hasn't given back. He hasn't made inroads into sending the kids back. He's kept them, sent them to re-education camps. And the FT did a good article about finding them on Russian adoption sites. So, it's absolutely genocidal, ethnic cleansing from the start, typical colonial and imperialism, Russian-style torture campaign that's going on in Ukraine. So I feel it's my obligation. I've got quite a unique view where I've seen that over the other side and seen what Russia's about on the other side, and also living here for 8 years. I certainly didn't go to university and study Russian culture or Russian in Ukrainian history. I literally just know what it's like because I live here, and I think that's what people are attracted to my time here and learning and being at ground level. I think that's what people are really attracted to, because going back to your bubble, they're not listening to the garbage for people that only come here to get a news story for a week, or do a documentary for a couple of weeks and go off. I'm actually here, live here. Yeah. Been a part of it here, spent my time here since 2018, worked with the military, now I do humanitarian aid work. So, I'm living this every day. I don't get paid for it, so I'm not pushed in any sort of way or what I have to say. I say what's on my mind, what the problems are, which is quite beneficial. I think that's largely a lot why people are interested in what I've got to say.
So, is the morale down at the moment? Has some people, as Stephen was saying this, he's in Kiev at the moment in live chat, or has been, and he's saying that actually Kursk has been a real morale boost for Ukrainians. Actually, that's something that we probably don't realize over here, that's another one of those benefits for Kursk, is what it's done for the Ukrainian general morale. But in general, do you think Ukrainians have a sense that they can prevail, and what does prevailing now look like?
Well, firstly, we're going back to that again. I think it's left what Ukraine have done over the last 2.5 years is really show how weak and incapable the Russian military are. Yeah. Not only have we become the first country to invade a nuclear superpower, which is quite an accolade, to be honest. There's no repercussions to that. We've crossed Russia's and Putin's red lines. Putin's made so many red lines, he's choking and strangling himself with them now. So, yeah, we need to act on that. We need to put pressure on Russia. Sanctions, in my view, from what I've just talked to you about earlier, are working to a degree, but that is like whack-a-mole. Yeah, they're trying to bypass, circumvent them all the time, but they are working because 70% on basic goods is a massive impact to Russians who only earn an average wage of $800 a month, maybe less, maybe a little bit more. So, you've got to sit there that your average guy is now really struggling. Even when I was captive, they were saying things have gone up. You know, they were pretty obvious with their water and cigarettes and Nyquil cigarettes. Now they're not even getting stuff. Yet there are some things in the bigger supermarkets circumventing the sanctions coming in from places like Kazakhstan and China and places like that. But, you know, eventually that'll start to wane off again. And the economic, what's their interest rate now, base rate? Even the ruble I saw yesterday is nearly up into 100 per. I mean, it's not going well. You know, it's really not going well over there. So, but you know, a lot of one of the biggest problems you got, the morale here is generally Kursk was really an energizer. But depending on where you live, if you live in Kherson and Kharkiv, you're going to look at this war a completely different way to someone who's living in Dnipro, Lviv, or Kiev. And Kiev and Dnipro have some pretty good air defense, you know, and you know, if you go west, it's some of it just really hasn't touched the west. So again, you've got, but the positives are that Ukraine are now launching drone missiles thousands of kilometers into Russia, and there's nowhere that can't be touched in Russia. So there's a lot of hope, because with the ballistic missile program, that's going to give us an edge where we can then hit anywhere we want to. Neptune missiles into Russia.
Yeah, you've heard some of the recent strikes have been with Neptune missiles. They seem to be just upping. They must have scaled up the production finally of them and starting to use them a little bit. It's quite good.
Yeah, and the Russian military, the machine is at capacity at the moment. So it's having to go out to places like North Korea and Iran. And now Iran's got itself immersed into a conflict possibly with Israel. They're not going to get that supply they were getting, because they're going to need all their rockets and drones and everything else that's going on. So you know, Russia started this war. Iran's had an impact in supporting Russia in Ukraine. You've then got, in return, Russia providing support for Iran, and Iran supply Hamas and Hezbollah and financially. So you've got this war's now escalated to the Middle East, and anybody that tells you it's not linked is really cuckoo land, to be fair. It's so out in your face and open, you know, that I would have thought Russia sort of siding with you know, Islamic extremist regime. And you know, and who would have thought that they would be supporting Russia into Europe to try and topple a democratically elected government? I mean, it's bizarre, the situation we're in, where largely people aren't even, you know, nobody's interested in Russian genocide here anymore. It's just bizarre.
It's heartbreaking. So, okay, so the final sort of final question, I guess, is, again, how do you see? Well, okay, can Ukraine prevail? What does prevailing look like? And, you know, realistically, what do you think is going to happen going forward?
It's a difficult one, because even the best, you know, I'm not an analyst.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah,
it's the best one. So what I'm going to say is I still think Ukraine can win, but that can only happen with Western support, like the US, NATO, European Union, continued financial backing. That can't, and what we got to now needs to be a bare minimum of weapon supplies. We need to get capabilities to deal with those glide bombs. So, because that is a major problem.
It's the problem number one. Yeah.
Part of taking Kursk means that we can attack further into Russia. So, you know, we've taken the ground. Why not give us the tools to be able to do the job? So one of the biggest problems is that. So you can't really take east of Ukraine without, in my opinion, taking Crimea, because it's such a strategical importance. But, you know, even this year, air defense units were reported on Telegram saying that their families to move out of Crimea because they can't support or guarantee their safety. So that should tell you about everything about where those air defense now are being deployed, not Crimea, but Belgorod and all of Putin's dachas and posh houses and his posh areas in Moscow. And so you know, it's always the grunts that are going to get the shit end of the stick, you know. And I monitor those through friends, monitor those Russian Telegram channels, which are, you know, I can only assume have a degree of why Russia wants to block Discord, because it is cracking down on its real bloggers and free speech, even with its own military bloggers. So you can only promote Russia. You know yourself, the new laws that came in just at the start of the SMO that basically stop really anybody reporting independently or neutrally against the military. You can't even say anything now in Russia without going to prison for it. So it's, you know, it's inevitable. It's only going to get worse. And things like hitting ammo dumps, and where, you know, we can get all the pictures live time now from Telegram channels. So you see these big explosions. Where do you think that all comes from? It comes from people on the actually in the occupied territories, and Russians, and who are taking pictures of this, put it all online, and we can see all this over this side, you know, and what the devastation that Ukraine's causing, that probably doesn't get out into the mainstream media enough, you know, the successes we have. But Russia are struggling with ammunition at the moment. You have to read those Telegram channels to understand that there's a lot of videos going up, people saying they haven't got any food, water, ammunition. They're being sent on these meat assaults with no gear. The morale is rock bottom. And what gives you a good indication in Russia that the morale is rock bottom is because when the discipline goes, when the command and control goes down, anyone does what they want. And how this last couple of weeks we've seen more executions of Ukrainian POWs than we've seen in the whole war. Counted over 20 this week, all on video, being mass executed. So, you know, that, where does that get in the public eye? Apart from podcasts like Ukraine the Latest, me and you talking about it, independent journalists. So, you know, once you see all that and you start, my background in the army was building these pattern of lives. I wasn't super intelligent. It wasn't MI6 or anything like that, but I collated a lot of information to draw a picture that I could warn people off what might be happening, look for the abnormal in the normal. So these, when you put them all together, I'm in a position here that being able to sort of evaluate what I see with lots of different aspects that are going on, to think, hold on, there's a lot of problems with Russia at the moment. Yeah,
this is basically what I say every day. So my videos, I give these same news videos every day. And actually, when you report on exactly the same statistics and anecdotes and video feeds and claims and this and that every single day for over 2 years, then you start, like you say, building up patterns. And I've been saying for a long time now that this is the pattern. This is where Russia are not in a good place. The thing is, Ukraine are not in a great place either, but it's who is being degraded at the greatest rate and who will break first. And I think, if, like you say, if the US and EU and allies maintain and improve their support of Ukraine, then Russia, unless they have China overtly helping them, and maybe you might see North Korean troops come now in serious numbers, because there is a bilateral agreement with North Korea that's rather like Article 5 that they signed only a few months back. And with Ukraine attacking into Kursk, that means Russia has been invaded and they can bring in North Korean troops. So unless something major like that happens, Russia are in lots and lots of trouble. But okay, do you think Ukraine are in a position to be able to militarily take back serious amounts of territory in Ukraine, like, for example, Donetsk, Luhansk, or parts thereof? Because I do worry that even though I think the only way Ukraine can militarily take those places back is if Russia politically crumbles. So if something happens in the Kremlin, then those troops will be pushed back and there's chaos. But if it's like troop on troop, fortification on fortification, I think Ukraine is still going to struggle to take back that territory.
There's plenty of fighting age males here, still between 18 and 25, and plenty of older generation too that, if needed to, could be called up. I don't see a problem with that in Ukraine. It's whether or not, like I go back to what I said earlier, is whether that support wanes. And would you want to fight if you didn't have the weapons and the artillery, and you knew that America was half-hearted behind it? Would you want to go out there and say? Most of the problems I get that were raised was, like I said to you, was not because people didn't want to. It's very proud here. They want to fight for their independence, but they don't want to be fighting a meat wave with just dive needlessly. They all want to contribute in a way. Mobilisation's got a little bit better here too. So if you like to come forward with your attributes and skills, you're likely more likely to get the job you want out here. Some people can't handle the truth, you see, because it'll be another one from somewhere over the other side of the world that really doesn't even understand about living in the east or Ukraine, has never been outside or even into Europe in a lot of cases. So we got to sit there and say, yeah, it's perfectly achievable if we get the support from the West and the US. So it's going to be very difficult to really succeed if we lose that support. And especially now, I mean, this before the elections is just horrendous. There's no decisions being made at all, and people are dying: old women, kids, children. Russia's genocide on Ukraine is continuing. And
I get this sense that Russia are kind of just throwing caution to the wind now. I don't know whether this is me being too hopeful, being a bit copium, but I get this sense where they just don't care anymore, and maybe that's the sort of, not the last throw of the dice, but they don't care if North Koreans are coming to help them in Ukraine. They don't care if they are killing Ukrainians, civilians too much. They don't care if some of their troops are assassinating, executing Ukrainian POWs, because actually there doesn't seem to be anything that's being done about that. So part of it's like they're learning that they can get away with it, but also part of it is like, if we don't succeed now before the wet season sets in, if we don't like capitalize on all of this kind of momentum, then we're all screwed. So they're just like, I get this sense they're throwing everything and the kitchen sink at Ukraine.
Yeah, the rains have come, funny enough. It's starting to, they're starting to get the temperatures drop, the rains have come, autumn's here, and once the rains come and then the snow comes, it's all stopped. So everyone's piling in what they can get in now. And I think you won't really, I mean, I've got it well with Kursk. So I was saying, I don't think you're going to see anything for the rest of this year, because really you've got two very armies fighting very similar fights. It's pretty much, it's a stalemate. And then suddenly they go into Kursk and take more ground than Russia's done in the last 7 months, in a couple of weeks. So, you sit there and say it's possible. Ukraine are very more advanced tactically than Russia. They have a value on life because and they incorporate that in their training, and how much training and where they're doing their training, and whereas Russia, a couple of weeks you throw it into the meat grinder, Storm Z units, they're really being pulled from prisons, and it's been an absolute cock up in a foreign policy for Putin, because not only has he failed in his special military operation, he's not got 30 kilometers past his own border in 2.5 years. He's extended the UN, the NATO borders.
That macro view again, like when you get a proper understanding of how little Russia, like we do worry about Pokrovsk, and we do worry about these fields, and like 8 kilometers of fields there and 2 kilometers of fields there, and a bunch of villages here, which is terrible. But then if you're thinking this is the second greatest army in the world invading a country that's geographically minuscule compared to the size of Russia, but like in terms of population, a quarter of the size plus, then or a quarter of the size, this is really underwhelming, and Russia have not done very well. Anyway, sorry.
No, not at all. And I keep pumping that. How far did the Nazis get before they lost the war? They got further than Russia's done in 3 years. Let's put it that way. So at the end of the day, I mean, that's a good analogy to sort of push towards to end on, really, because war is miserable. It does go back and forth. It only takes a bit of technology to come in, and suddenly you're fighting that. And at the moment, Ukraine is very good with the technology side of it. I mean, to beat a conventional navy, to drive it out of the Black Sea when you don't really have a navy yourself, it's just phenomenal. I mean, it's changed naval warfare forever, and there'll be Ukrainians training the rest of the world on this when this is all over, because they've succeeded. Yes, they've lost ground. Yes, they've lost 18% of the country, but now Russia's lost 1% of Russia.
Yeah.
How embarrassing is that when you launched an SMO to lose part of your own country? I mean, it's embarrassing. And if anyone, and part of the Russian military, I mean, you touched on it, the Chechen TikTok warriors who brandished themselves special forces. They were the ones, on the border in Kursk who beat the retreat. And, and now his lawyers, Shapiro's been arrested in Russia. So, Captain, I call him General and Major fuck up, to be honest, because he's just self-appointed Major and General. He's been through no tactical training. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he's just making cock up. And this week you'll see his lawyer's just been arrested for corruption. So it's only a matter of time before he sees the door, the window, and the team, before he gets... and Putin just surrounds himself with these idiots. And eventually, if Ukraine holds on and stays firm and we still get the support, I have no doubt, because they're far more professional and more democratic and more streamlined outfit, it's like you say, whether or not there's still the will to fight. Will to fight, as I tell everybody, is the most important thing in warfare.
Yeah.
You know, no money in the world can buy will to fight. And if you've got your backs to the wall, you're going to fight harder. So, you know, my money's still on Ukraine, providing we get the support from the US and Great Britain.
Well, that's a great place to end. But before you go, I'm going to run through some big thanks to people and a few comments from them all. Just in terms of Ramzan Kadyrov, he just to explain to some newbies at the channel, he gave himself the first award. He created the award of Hero of Chechnya and then awarded it to himself, like, which was insane. And then the next year he awarded it to his son. And you're like, really? So that is why I've made the Legend of the Universe award, and I awarded that to myself. So I am.
Can I have the second one? Can I have the second one then?
Well, so there is a bit of a competition for that, including one of the guys that's helping me with the mapping, one of the guys that helps me with my Discord server. You know,
okay, fair
but
enough.
you're in the mix, and at the end of the day, it will just come down to my whimsical decision, Shaun. And I may well award it to you, so I'll keep you posted. And it's actually now I've extended it to the Legend of the Multiverse to take into account, of course, the much larger sense of reality we might have. Anyway, I digress. Can I just give a few thanks? Thanks to Richard Bennett for gifting ATP Geopolitics memberships, as he always does. He's such a legend, but not of the universe. Kevin Forst, thank you so much as well. Really kind, Kevin. Niels Clements, 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you very much, Niels. Really kind of you. James Cowley, likewise, gifting some memberships. So it's really kind of all of you guys there. AJ Simo, thank you for that, matey. I highly recommend our guest's book, Shaun Pinner, Live, Fight, Survive, available on Kindle too, and indeed other ebook providers such as Kobo. I use Kobo audiobooks because I don't want to give Amazon all of my cash. There are other providers, but there is the Amazon page for you guys, so please check out his book. Please go and buy it. It's absolutely brilliant. Mark Bisque, who, and you like this, Shaun, he's a Canadian, him, Mark and Olena, who live in Canada, and they support the channel loads. I went and visited Olena's parents in Sinarivka, near on the Inhulets River, near Kherson, right? And it was wonderful. He said, I finished Shaun's incredible book weeks ago. There is a lot of love and respect in these two inadequate words. Thank you, Mark and Olena.
Amazing. So I always like hearing it when it goes out to other countries. It's quite nice. I get some nice messages, and people on desert islands on holiday reading their book and sending it to me. It's lovely. Yeah, it's really good. It has an impact, and that's the whole reason we wrote it, really.
And especially for Ukrainians to say thank you, and obviously a personal thank you as well for, you know, fighting on.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, because it's translated into Ukrainian, so it's a big thing for another country to take on. It's just another unique view. And who else? If those guys that died, if we didn't write the book, how would they be remembered? Like Demon and people like that.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. The people who you knew, and Paul Urey, as mentioned, you know, who, you know, he had his own health complications with diabetes and whatnot, and obviously being tortured, you know, things just didn't go well. The Weasel, thank you very much for your super sticker, matey. Really appreciate that. Johnny, thank you so much. Johnny Christensen with some Danish love thrown in there. And Richard Demi, I really appreciate that. Thank you, Shanky, for your support for the channel. It is what allows me to keep doing this and getting on guests as amazing as Shaun. Now, Sarah says, and I don't know if there's anything we can add to this, but your view as a last thing, can you add something on the fact that Russia's attacked 3 commercial ships, possible consequences? Are Ukrainians talking about this, like Odessa being struck so badly? That's obviously the way that they can make money in order to sustain their war.
Well, they've been doing it since the start. You've got the Houthis doing it too. They're really going after commercial shipping, which to tell it's another link really to what's happening with Iran and Houthis and commercial shipping, to now Russia hitting commercial shipping. It's incestuously linked with the same tactics and the same weaponry to do it. And they've been doing it since the start of the war. They've been hitting the ports in Odessa, the grain silos, and pretty much it's not anything new. And more, like I said, is miserable. There are some things I know, but I can't really talk about them at the moment. I'm not fully genned up on the the actual ships that were hit. But we're hitting ships in the Crimea. We're hitting those craft, hitting the last one quite recently that ferries products over to and I'm the first one to say, I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not all pro-Ukrainian all the time. If we're doing it, then we can expect it back, and that's where I sit with a lot of it. What you've got is the thing that I struggle with is the women, children, and the absolute targeting of basic genocide that's going on here, and lack of anybody talking about it.
Well, I would say the ship that the Ukrainians hit, if it's the one you're talking about, is the same one. Is the ferry that ships military equipment effectively across the Kursk Strait, and so that's very much a military target. Whereas here we have the Russians hitting ships that are also not, they're not owned by Ukraine either. So there is some very interesting dynamics, but again, like, the countries are toothless, or not toothless, but they're afraid to actually say, hang on, that's not on. And it would, in the same way that the UN doesn't quite do enough. And what are we doing about the assassination of POWs being executed, caught on camera?
We haven't touched on the ecocides. They've just flooded the river there, and killed all the wildlife. You haven't talked about. There's so much we can talk about. Russia has no moral bar. It doesn't care who it kills, even its own people. It doesn't care who it kills. It doesn't care. I've watched 500,000 army fight 500,000 army, over 2 years. I've watched Russia kill at least 80 to 100,000 people in Mariupol. So many civilians that were there while we were still defending Mariupol that we couldn't get out, because when the Green Corridor was opened up, Russia bombed the Green Corridor. It's been a high priority target on Ukrainian children because the demographic is shrinking in Russia. So it wants those kids. The worker shortages in Russia now are phenomenal. There's a massive worker shortage there because if anybody's not dead, they're fighting in Ukraine. And if they're not fighting in Ukraine, they're captured. And there's so many people linked up with the war. And a lot of people can't work anymore because they're handicapped, and it's problematic for the government. So eventually they can't pay these. They don't care. They always wanted a quick win, 3 days, and never happened. Now we're fighting back. They're getting really pissed off. Now the desperation is that they're now attacking, killing more Ukrainian POWs, killing more civilians, because it smacks the desperation. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
I agree. I really agree with you. Look, talking about your house that was lost in Mariupol, a question I meant to ask you much earlier, and sorry, this is going to sound out of place, but did the government help you become rehoused, or did they just not have the money to be able to consider doing that for people in places like Mariupol who lost properties?
They have done it. I don't feel it's our capabilities that we had financial savings, and we had made a choice to rent a place. My wife was still working, so she managed to rent a place while I was in captivity, and we just stuck at that. So, but I'm sure if we had nothing, they would have done it, because there are areas in Dnipro where they've taken in people from Mariupol. I work with the Mariupol food kitchens as well. Little Mariupol, give them a plug in Dnipro, who give us the room to do our speaking classes and speaking group. And, there's communities here all on Telegram now. Those communities are now dotted, unfortunately, between Dnipro and Germany and Romania and Switzerland and the UK. And all of us are still in this Mariupol community group, but we're just all over the world now because of what Russia's done. And you've got to remember that, predominantly those are mainly predominantly first language Russian speaking Ukrainians that Putin wanted to help, but just don't want to get caught in, Russia, because it's grim, miserable and controlling, and it's an autocratic government that's if you're living in Moscow and you're quite well off, you'll do all right. But if you're living anywhere else outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, you're going to find it exceptionally hard, and So they a lot of refugees. I hear 6 million refugees that have gone, out of Ukraine. The men can't go out, which is people are getting tired, but while the will to fight, I keep going on about, is still there. There's plenty that have the will to fight, and we're still fighting. We're still here. We've got no other choice. There's no other choice, really.
Well, that's a beautiful thing to end on, because, you know, amazingly, and I feel honored that my community is still here, but we are still here for Ukraine. And this is what drives me on a daily basis. And I sometimes catch myself and thinking, how am I still doing this? Like, from a personal point of view, how have I, like I said at the beginning, how have I still got things to say about this? And it's because it is incessant, and Russia continues to do horrific things, and it is up to us to remain committed to what is morally right, to what is also strategically right for all our nations. Like, it's in our best interest that Russia is stopped in Ukraine, and in no uncertain terms is stopped. It's not like this is charity for Ukraine. It is charity for Ukraine as well. It is morally right for Ukraine, and we are looking out for those who have been oppressed, right? But it's also useful, in fact necessary, for the EU, for the UK, for the US to have Russia put in its place right now. So there are all sorts of reasons why we are still here, concerned for the outcome in Ukraine. Shaun, thank you so much for everything that you did for Ukraine and continue to do for Ukraine. Please go and buy his book, as some people already said that they are going to. It is really important that you know, stories like this exist, to give memories to the people who don't exist, and also to give us an understanding of the terrors that have taken place on behalf of Russian imperialism. Shaun, your final words, mate.
Well, you can follow me on I've got my handle now, at OldDog100UA on Twitter X. We report for the ground. I'm not a mill blogger. I'm not a podcaster as such. Just someone to report what's important to us on the ground here in Ukraine. You can follow me there on Instagram as Shaun Pinner, and also Facebook. The book, like I said, is going to be made into a film as well, which is another media platform. I don't feel when I wrote the book, I was so not sure I wanted to write the book at the time, because my friends, you've got to remember, are still in captivity, 2.5 years in. But I owe it to them to tell our story of Mariupol. And we donate a lot of money from book sales to drones for Ukraine through Lithuania and Estonia. So, you know, €2 per each book goes towards drones for Ukraine. So we try and help there.
Amazing.
We're still trying to raise money soon. Brave You Fund to do a lot of work with them. We're now trying to raise medical beds for the guys at the front line. So you'll see me do a lot of posts about trying to raise money for that, stretchers and things like that to go to the front lines. So we just did a thank you to the community you just talked about, because we just did. Everyone remembers Yuri, who couldn't talk when he got exchanged, the POW. I got in touch with someone who helped me on NX to send a book, and we raised some money for their GoFundMe account. So we accelerate that, got him $5,000 for sort of rehabilitation, to help with rehabilitation costs, because you don't understand that when these guys come out and exchange, they don't really have a job anymore, and the money's not going to last them too long, and they need a lot of rehabilitation. And if you could alleviate that problem from them, where they don't have to worry about money too much for the first year, then you know, like myself, it really does help them rehabilitate back into normal life. And they've been in prison for 2.5 years under some horrendous conditions. No humanitarian aid group actually gets into Russian prisons. So, you know, and that's another thing we push and try to raise awareness of, that no Red Cross is allowed to visit Ukrainian prisoners of war. So big campaigner for that. Stay in touch, keep supporting Ukraine, and thank you very much to everybody that does support Ukraine.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, stay on the line, Shaun, and thank you for those words. And go and check out Shaun's Twitter, and I'm sure he's got ways that you can donate to the sorts of concerns that he was discussing there. And just to let you guys know, we are just about to start a NAFO campaign for a truck for a unit, and there are obviously all of Greg Terry's charity work is still open for donation. So go and look at all the very many brilliant things that so many people are doing to support Ukraine. Thank you, Shaun, so much. Go and check out his book. Stay on the line, mate. And in the meantime, community, thank you so much for being who you are, and for sticking with this for as long as you have. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Oh, I'm Slava.